Hello and welcome to CG Visuals, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to add a Navy destroyer to your shots using only 2D images that you can find on the internet, and it's going to be done 100% in After Effects, so there's no 3D involved, and we'll pay special attention to integrating the ship with the water using these wave effects here, which are actually created using a fractal noise inside of After Effects. So the inspiration behind this tutorial actually comes from a show that I was watching that's quite popular in the States called The Last Ship, which features a US Navy destroyer in the promotional art, and specifically the composition of this shot was something I wanted to try and replicate in 2D without having to dabble in any sort of 3D rendering and everything, and I thought this would be quite achievable. The first thing we'd need is a plate, a background. It could be something you filmed yourself. I wanted to get a similar lighting to this shot, so I had a look around. I went onto Video Hive and I actually managed to find this clip by typing in anchored ship. Found it for only $8, so I couldn't believe my luck. I downloaded that. Once I had the plate, then I had to look at what we could use to do the destroyer. So essentially we'd want an image of a US destroyer in similar weather conditions, at the right perspective, and in similar lighting. So I had a look around and I ended up typing in Korean destroyer to the search results in Google, and I managed to find this image which has a similar lighting direction, overcast weather, and a perspective that will work, so that when we combine these two elements using simple 2D compositing and a few other techniques, we can actually create the illusion that this is a 3D destroyer sailing on the ocean, which is going to be quite exciting. So we'll jump back into After Effects. I've already brought in these elements. So with our plate, I'm just going to create a new composition with it by dragging it into there. If you've got your own footage that you've filmed, that will be great. I'm sure we're going to adapt the techniques that we're using here to be applicable in your shot. And everything that we're going to do is going to be by manipulating this image, essentially. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is right click, go Effect, Keying, and we'll choose the linear color key. Now if we choose the key color and choose a value in the sky, we'll be able to start adjusting these values. We can adjust the matching tolerance to try and refine the map. We can hold down Control and left click to get a slightly more precise control as we slide through the values. We want to get rid of as much of the ocean as we can without losing too much of the ship. It's a little bit unavoidable in some places, but that will do for now. We also want to try and bring back and preserve as much of the detail in the antenna of the ship. So I've duplicated the layer, and on the bottom layer I'm just going to hit the reset button on our linear color key, and we'll choose an area of the sky that's close to the antenna, and this time we'll adjust the values so that we're preserving this detail or as much as possible. And then we just want this area to affect the antenna, so we'll click on our pen tool and we'll create a mask for just the antenna area of the ship. A very quick garbage mask, as most of the fine details are done for us. Some areas we're going to lose some details, just unavoidable. Like this flag, we're going to have to get rid of that, because the flag should be moving in the wind, but of course it's just a 2D image. If we wanted to add our own flag back in, I'm sure we could do that. So now we've got our antenna layer, we can toggle that mask off. That just brings back some of the details that we lost in the antenna. Now as for the rest of the ship, as you can see we've got lots of holes and stuff. The edges are pretty much done for us, but we are going to have to create a garbage mask, and in some areas we're going to have to bring back some of the detail that we're losing. Now, luckily we don't have to be too fanatical with the edges, as most of it's done for us. So we can just keep going over with this mat here. We don't need to worry. Essentially it's just a semi-detailed garbage mask. We only have to do it on this one frame, and then we're one step closer to having a detailed ship that we can work with. So these areas turned out okay, so we can be a little bit more brief with those. And so now we have our garbage mask. Which is looking okay. Of course we're still losing quite a lot of detail on the ship, so we're going to have to duplicate our top layer again. This time we'll just completely delete the linear color key and any masks that we made. We'll hide that for now, and we're simply going to do a mask around any areas that we need to bring back. Like here. Easily bring back any missing information. I'm also going to duplicate this layer one more time. This is just going to be as a reference for what we were losing. Could try giving this a different blending mode. Yes, that would reveal all the holes for us, which we can identify them a bit more easily. I think probably this top deck looks like it's missing a little bit as well, so let's... Well, that might actually be how it's supposed to look. And this is where we're going to have to be a little bit more careful and actually bring back areas that were accidentally keyed out. Okay, so now if we disable this layer that we were using just as a reference, and we re-enable the layer that's going on top, what we've managed to do is bring back all of the details that we were missing. And we can select all of these masks here, press F to bring up the feathering, and just give them all a value of 1, just so they're not super harsh lines. Now, one other little trick I think we can do, all depends on whether we think perhaps the edges are a little bit too harsh. They might look okay. We'll delete that layer here. Okay, so now that we've finished our garbage masking, let's go and see what this actually looks like. See how successful our mask is. I'm just going to delete this extra comp I made accidentally. We'll go back to our main comp, which has been named. We'll drag our footage clip in, our plate, and then we'll bring in the destroyer comp that we've been working on with our mask, and we'll see how well this works. Scale this down a bit. So let's see, I think the mask holds up pretty well. There are some major improvements we could add to it though, so let's think what we could do. First of all, let's just pre-compose all these layers. And we'll do something about these waves here. I think the easiest way to fix them, simply just do create a solid that's the same color as the ship that then goes over the waves. So we'll go new, solid. I'll select a color that's the same as the ship. And what we can actually do is take advantage of our matte that we've created. That's our solid, and we can actually use this destroyer comp as a matte for the solid. So if we choose alpha matte, that will only be applied. It's being restricted to the alpha channel, which is quite handy. Also give this feathering mask some feathering. And I think we can get away with just adding some noise, just so that it doesn't look like a perfectly smooth solid. I mean, we'll obviously add more noise later when we're compositing it. We can also go to noise and grain, fractal noise. If we change the blending mode to, say, multiply perhaps. Maybe we'll try something like soft light. We can just add some variation, just so it doesn't look too perfect. Bring the contrast down a little bit. So if we just look at our before and after. Just trying to match what's going on with the ship there. And that way we can add our own waves in. We'll also do the same thing here as well very quickly. So we'll just create a new solid, choose a color similar to the ship. And is it just that one instance, I think, where the wave comes over? Yeah. So we only need to focus on this area. So let's just do a quick mask here. Once again, we'll copy our destroyer matte, do the same thing we did last time, setting the track matte to alpha matte. That way when we enable this, we can then put this behind. We can then put this behind our blue solid that we created. And let's just copy the noise effects in there as well. Give it a bit of feathering. And I think in this case, we might actually need to be a little bit more careful on where exactly we apply this. So let's only apply it where we need it. I think the feathering causes some issues. Might be the fractal noise is too bright perhaps. I don't think we're going to be able to use fractal noise when we're using it in this way. So we'll just have a little bit more noise instead. and slightly less noise. And if we increase the feathering just a little bit more, see how much we can get away with. We could use paint tools, we could even go and do some of this stuff in Photoshop, but I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. So we've got rid of our waves now. So then what I would do is pre-compose all of this to another layer. I'm not really giving the names that much thought. Now when we put this destroyer over the water, we're going to have this issue on how we make the connection. And you note it looked more realistic when we actually had the waves. So we're going to have to find a way to add these waves back in a realistic way. So I think what we can do, we're going to have to create some sort of animated mask that looks like waves here. So we'll create a black solid and we're going to go to the fractal noise. And we can animate the transform options here, so we'll do that very quickly. In fact, before we do any of that, we're going to extend this composition to something about maybe 20 seconds, because at this point we're actually going to be creating an animated asset, and then we'll just choose time freeze. So we're just frozen the frame, so now we can apply our effects. And of course by freezing the frame it allows us to extend the length of that layer as well, where we wouldn't have been able to do that before. Now we want to animate the turbulence to try and simulate waves. We can also animate the evolution. Going to want to create a lot more contrast. I think we'll also play with the scale as well. Yes, we'll keep it ununiformed. And let's play around with some of these different looks. We want to get something a little bit softer looking to be our ocean. I have no idea what settings we're going to use. Maybe just sticking with the most basic fractal noise settings for now will be better until we know exactly how this is going to look. Now essentially what we want to do is create a mask for our fractal noise layer that intersects the ship. Essentially we're going to use this as a subtraction mask. So if we go to our track mat and choose, let's see, the fractal noise we created doesn't actually have an alpha channel yet, so we'll just have to use a luma inverted mat. It's going to be using the black and white values to create a mat of sorts. So we'll go have a look at what's happening. Firstly, let's feather this. And here we can start to play around with how extreme this is going to look. We'll bring our mask down. This is going to be one of those things that is a little bit tricky to get right, I think. Trying to think of what other effects we could add to make this look a bit more like a wave pattern. Maybe if we increase the complexity. Let's see, what could we do with a blur perhaps? We could maybe use a vector blur, try and create a more wave-like effect. That could work, I suppose. Wonder if there's another way to do that, maybe if we reverse the effect. Ooh, looks like we almost got something there. Let's try reducing that. I've gone for ridge smoothness of 5, which seems to have a bit of a difference, but mainly I've set the type to perpendicular. Let's have a look at the speed of the animation and see. Ooh, another thing we could do actually is I can't remember how to get to it, so I'm going to go to the effects and presets, and I'm going to go to, let's see, roughen edges is what we wanted. Let's just type in edge, we should be able to find it. Roughen edges. There we go, now we can do something interesting. Let's look at the border. We do want to create that sort of wave effect. Size, bring that down a bit. We can also offset this as well, which will be handy. Yeah, let's do that then. We'll create a keyframe, go to the end. We'll even animate the turbulence a little bit. We're stacking a lot of randomized effects on top of each other, and hopefully this will create the desired effect that we're going for. Starting to look like waves are intersecting with the ship, which is good. But some of the ship is being brought back in places we don't want. Like it almost looks like the wave is going. I'm going to increase the exposure here. I can think of a cheat way we can do this. Let's bring the exposure back down. Let's just create another. Actually, let's duplicate this black solid. And with this version, we could bring the scale down a bit. We can go into our fractal noise settings and let's see what we can do. Let's just solo this layer. That might actually be what we want. We combine these two effects. We can actually just transform this down. I'm going to press shift and down on the arrow keys. And then of course we'll have to combine these layers by pre-composing them. Just call it matte. So everything's a matte. And then to re-enable our destroyer. Let's just go straight to the destroyer comp and see how that's looking. Yes, definitely needs a little bit of work. I think we made the scale a little bit too small on this layer, so let's bring that back up. I might just play around with the transform options of the whole layer actually. Try and make it look like the surface of an ocean somehow. We also want to create something underneath the ship that resembles water foam. So I think we could probably help if we at least just put something under there that looked like water foam. Maybe just a grey solid. I think actually, if we could have the grey solid but only be applied around the edges of the ship. That would be quite interesting. In that case, we would have to pre-compose our destroyer and the mat yet again in order to be able to do what we're thinking. So now we can have this grey solid be applied to the alpha of the ship. Let's go alpha inverted. Duplicate our ship here so we can still see it normally. Okay, there we go. So we're adding this grey solid underneath, but it's being confined to the alpha channel that we created. But because the alpha channel is not 100% opaque in places, we're starting to see some of that foam at the bottom. But of course, we only want it to be visible where the ship is. So let's create yet another mask. Just want it to be at the water level. So far we haven't done anything fun. We've just played around with masks and tried to make foam. So you can see that's what we've created for the water. Probably going to have to pre-render this at some point because it's quite slow. What we'll do is we'll just cache in some of this and we'll see how our ship is behaving on the water. So we're starting to get the effect we want. I think we may have made our waves move a little bit too fast. That will involve going back and editing the map that we created here. I'm going to put the resolution to half res and we'll just see what the general speed of the whoa. I don't know how fast we moved that. Which one is moving insanely fast? Is it this one? It must just be the offset turbulence then. Must have moved that far more than I thought that I had. What we can do is we can just, if we select a keyframe, say here, and then we'll drag that and replace the keyframe at the end, we'll essentially have just slowed down the whole effect there. We've also got the offset turbulence on our roughen edges effect as well, so let's do the same thing. Dramatically slow that down, create a keyframe, replace the keyframe at the end, make sure we are replacing that keyframe. Let's see how much of a difference that's made. I don't know where that speed is coming from. It's moving incredibly quickly. All we seem to have changed there is the evolution options. We didn't actually, I can't remember if we actually did affect the offset turbulence. Let's try doing that again. We'll slow the turbulence here down even more. It should be a crawl now. Okay, it's a little bit more sensible. Of course, on the roughen edges, I think we're going to want to increase the evolution options and perhaps even the complexity, or not. What about the border? That controls how deep the waves are now, doesn't it? So we don't want them looking too deep. Let's have a quick look at that. Feels like our waves are moving way too slowly. I'll also increase the evolution options for the fractal noise as well. Should be possible to get the edge moving a bit more. It definitely must be the evolution that's going to affect this. I think it's more the roughened edges actually. Yeah. I'm going to increase the evolution for the roughened edges by quite an insane value, just so we can go to one extreme. Okay. And then if we bring it down a bit to something more sensible like 10. And then maybe 5. And then we'll decrease the border size by 10 so that the waves aren't too tall. Okay, that seems pretty good. Now what we can do is copy these effects. Or if we just copy the keyframes. I was going to copy them onto the other layer here. But actually, I'm starting to think that maybe this would just create a better effect. I'm not seeing as much of that water foam that I'd like. Why is that? If we want to see more of the water foam, then we're going to have to manipulate the edges of this mask somehow with a simple choker, I think. If we go the opposite way, that will allow us to bring some of the foam back. Oh, that's looking good. And then if we create another black solid, we're simply going to create some variation for the foam. Actually, there might be no need to do that. We might be able to do that simply with a fractal noise applied directly to the layer. And if we choose multiply, yeah, we can start adding some more frequencies and variations to the foam. We'll add an expression to the evolution options by pressing Alt and left click and typing wiggle, no, sorry, scratch that, time, star. Try something extreme like 500. And then let's bring that down to something much more sensible, and we'll also decrease the effect, the intensity of the effect. I'm going to try a very quick little experiment, which is going off script slightly. I'm just wondering if I was to create an adjustment layer with a simple choker, I would be able to adjust the foam, but then I could control the opacity of that adjustment layer through another fractal noise, which would be applied to a black solid. So we'll go to keying. Where's our fractal noise? It's in noise, isn't it? Fractal noise. And if we just animated the evolution of our fractal noise with the same expression, I'm going to isolate this layer as well. Bring the scale down. Increase the contrast. Increase the complexity. Change it to something more wavy, maybe the swirly option. Perhaps cloudy. Well, as usual, perhaps it's more sensible just to leave it on the default options. Like I said, I just want to add variation. Decrease the scale a bit more. Try and increase the contrast. So now if we select our adjustment layer and tell it to use the Luma values, the Luma mat of the alpha channel. For some reason we need to deselect that. I think that's a mistake. Okay, there we go. Right, so we've got our adjustment layer. Now it looks like it's being affected by the fractal noise that we created, and all of this should combine to create some natural looking waves. I know we're cramming a lot of techniques in here, but I mean that's pretty interesting. And let's go back to our main comp. Still can't see those damn waves, so I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with them, and I'm even going to create a curve. So I just want to see more of that foam. Against the colour black it looks really obvious, but then when we go to the actual shot you can barely even see it. I think I'll also increase the colour as well. So if we just generate a fill option here, just go for pure white, see if we can see that. Okay, we can see that. So now we know where the extreme is. We'll go 50% on the fill, maybe even 25. Try 50 again. Let's come back a little bit with that simple choker to only -3. It's either all or nothing with the waves. Just about see them. Haven't even considered feathering the mask yet. Or did we already do that? Ah, if we unfeather the mask a little bit, that makes it a bit more obvious. And it's either going to be that we can't see them, or we completely go over the top and make the foam look really unrealistic. Either way, we can't win. Just going to cash in a few frames. A few frames is all I need to get a feel for the motion. Okay, so we've got our connection where, now this is just the foam that's supposed to represent the connection between the ship and the waves, but we actually need something that is going to represent the actual body of foam that's being accumulated under the ship as it moves. Now we can actually bring in one of the assets, which is of course included free in the tutorial files. You can also just find it floating around on the YouTube channel. We've got this wave effect. And essentially we can just scale this up, and we'll put this underneath the ship. This will just be a cheap way to get some waves underneath that ship. Bring the opacity down, of course. Going to want to add some color correction to it, I think. Let's try just bringing the curves down. It might be slightly easier if we just temporarily bring our footage into the destroyer comp that we've got here, so we don't need to keep jumping back and forth to see what it looks like. playing around with the fill options. Once we start putting stuff underneath the ship, then suddenly the waves we created become more obvious. At least now we're starting to get the effect that we want. Of course it's not perfect. Had to tweak around with the version that I had to get it to look the way I wanted. But now let's just move our ship into position. We haven't done any colour correction to it as well, so just watch this actually, if you like colour correction. We'll go to colour correction, tritone. We'll choose our midtones. We'll choose the darkest point in the image, which is this random duck. We'll go to the highlights. We'll choose the brightest point in the image. And we'll just put that effect down to about 25%. Maybe 15. Then we'll go to our layer styles. We'll go color overlay. Open up the options here for the color. We'll just do that about maybe a little bit. We'll also bring back a bit of the saturation that we've lost with hue and saturation. And then we'll go to layer styles again, and we'll go inner glow. Go to the inner glow options and we'll just choose color of the sky. Set the blending mode just to normal. Put the size up a bit. And then let's go layer styles again, and this time I'm going to add a bevel. And I'm just going to use the bevel to cheat the light direction and just make it look like we've got light coming in from a certain direction even though we don't. So let's go to the angle. We just want the highlights to be facing the sun. Altitude, I don't think we really want to change the altitude. It's even giving us the illusion of a shadow as well. It's pretty amazing. Go size, put that down to 1. Soften up a little bit maybe. We can go to, actually let's not soften it just yet. Go to our highlights and we only want like a tiny bit of highlights. You see, like for example on this edge where the light should just be reflecting off of it a bit. It's all about subtlety. Do the same with the shadow color as well. Just add a little bit in just to help sell the effect. It also helps to not make it look completely 2D as well. Probably bring that color down a little bit. I wonder if it's possible to... Now maybe softening would be a good idea. Of course we need to blur the whole image. We've got a perfectly sharp image here that needs to be matching the blurriness of the actual scene. So we can go to a compound blur. We can do something a little bit more sophisticated than just a fast blur. We want to do something... We can either blur the inside or we can blur the whole thing. So this one will just sort of add blurring around the edges, but we'll try and preserve some of the details. So if we go put this down to like 2 or something, and then we'll add some noise over the whole thing. We don't have that much control over the noise. Like it would be nice to go in and change, you know, how much noise and size of the noise is in each individual channel, but you know, just for the time being. Let's see if we can add a really cheap drop shadow to it as well. Drop shadow. What can we do? Can we get the same angle? That would be nice. Probably just create the shadow myself with a solid, you know, just on the water. But this would be pretty cool if we could just get a shadow really cheaply. And what it's creating on the water there could be useful. Of course, we wouldn't really have a very harsh shadow anyway, so bring the distance in a bit. Definitely increase the size. Bring up the distance a little bit and bring the opacity down quite a lot, because it's quite a cheap effect. It's not really worth using, to be honest. I wouldn't normally use a drop shadow. But now, if we just do something rather interesting, let's increase the noise a little bit more, decrease that compound blur. I think that bevel, we went a little bit too far with the bevel. I think the soften doesn't really help it. It's supposed to be just a highlight effect, so. Shame we can't use a mask to control where the bevel is applied without duplicating the layer again. So I'm just going to bring these effects down quite a bit now. Toggle the bevel on and off, see what it's doing. I think it works at the front of the ship, but at the back of the ship it's making it less realistic, so I'm going to have to duplicate the layer, I'm going to have to turn the bevel effect off for the layer beneath, and for this layer the only effect that we want to be applied is the bevel effect. And that way well, no, actually that's not true. We're going to need all of the layers on. But we can turn the drop shadow off, I think. What about the inner glow? No, we're going to need to keep that on. Okay, and then we can just create a mask. Just applies the bevel where I think it's useful, which is just at this front part of the ship, where you would expect the light to be hitting it anyway. Problem is, doing that creates a bit of a weird seam, so feathering should fix it. Okay, now we can actually look at what we've done and see how much of an improvement it is if we turn all the layer styles off. We put these two ships sort of next to each other somehow. You can see how in a few quick moments with some layer styles and some basic colour correction we've managed to sell this effect quite a bit more. So now I'm going to let this cache in. I think we could even animate the ship moving with the waves, which would be nice. So I'm going to do that. Add some animation. Do 10 seconds, I think. Also, this foam wave probably doesn't last for 10 seconds, so what's going on with our foam wave? Why can't we see it properly? Okay, it needs to be at full size, doesn't it? In order for it to be visible. So once we get to about here, the wave starts to dissipate. We'll need another one. We're just going to need to keep duplicating this effect over and over again. We get a way of bringing the opacity down. We're also going to have to increase the composition size, the width, to accommodate that wave. Probably be better to just actually add the wave into the other comp as like an extra effect rather than integrating it into this asset that we're creating. Because it's also being affected by our adjustment layer here as well, which we can probably fix by simply taking our destroyer, duplicating it yet again, and using that as a mask for this fractal noise here, which is now only being applied to the ship, which is then being used by the adjustment layer, which should now only be applying its effects to the to just the parts that we want. Well, no, that doesn't even seem to be true either, because it's still affecting our wave, and I don't know why it's doing that. For whatever reason, though, we can just deal with it. I think I'm not going to have the waves in this comp. I think I'm going to add all the assets into this comp so that we can control them a bit better. But it shouldn't matter too much just for the time being. I just want to see this in motion. Should get some feedback for the work that we've done. Okay, so I'm going to allow this to cache in, and then we'll get to see what we've done. Right, so let's set that up. Okay. I'm going to allow this to render, and then we'll see what this looks like. Okay, so now this is rendered, I've brought in the clip. Let's see what it looks like. So first off, our destroyer is moving too quickly. It's not that it's moving too quickly, it's just that the effect we've got doesn't really support it moving that quickly. And I think the main problem for that is it doesn't really look like it's passing through the waves. We slowed down that how the waves moved quite a lot, but we're going to have to speed that up. So let's go back into this thing, because the problem is, as our destroyer is moving through the waves don't look like they're moving much. So let's go into our fractal noise, and we'll go to our offset turbulence, and see what we can do. So we need to move it that way, don't we? I think the edge of the wave is more controlled by the roughen edges effect here, roughen edges. So I think as we move that, that's what makes the waves look like they're actually moving. Let's quickly preview that. Okay, so honestly, I don't think we even need to have offset turbulence for the fractal noise. I think it's all just the roughen edges. So let's undo what we did there. Going back to roughen edges here, let's see how fast those waves are moving. We could have them a lot more faster than that. I think we could even increase the evolution a little bit as well. And maybe even the height of the wave this time. I'm going to increase the height of the wave, and I'm going to increase the edge sharpness as well. Just wondering whether we need to keep the complexity as it is. Ooh. Probably keep it on 2 actually. Well, that's interesting. I think we could even get away with a little bit more. And I'm actually going to duplicate this again. So we've just got these two, made a duplication of it, and then I'm going to go to the complexity here. We'll make some tiny waves, I think. Tiny waves that don't move as quickly, but just kind of add a little bit more variation. We'll even change the blending mode to screen. I'm going to move our finer waves down a little bit as well. So hopefully we'll have big waves and lots of small waves. And on the small waves here, which is the layer on top, I'm going to try dramatically increasing the evolution speed. Because I want it to have the effect of like small little choppy waves. Just have it ridiculously fast now, I think. What we might actually want to do is keep the scale the same as the layer beneath it, but just change the complexity of the effect. So that way we're not changing the how it looks too much, and we're just adding sort of frequencies to it. Gonna have to bite the bullet and preview it in full res. Also going to, I know I initially moved it down, but let's move it back up. That should look a bit more realistic, and then the key is just to not move these destroyers as quickly as we would moving them. So now they just look like they're travelling a bit more slowly. Okay. It's kind of difficult to really gauge how the effect looks without doing it in full res. Takes too long to preview. I have a feeling though we need to go bigger with those waves. Okay, so this time I'm just going to render out the destroyer asset here. So that way if it does look good, we can start duplicating and playing around with it and having a bit more fun. So I'm just going to render out about 7 seconds worth. So I'll render this out. See you in a moment. Okay, so now that we've rendered our South Korean destroyer, I should mention that I actually, in the render options, to make sure that I had an alpha channel, I chose the format was a QuickTime PNG, and I just simply made sure that the channels included the alpha channel as well. So I've rendered that out. And now I have our destroyer as an asset. Now if you remember, we still need to apply all the same layer effects to our asset that we did. So I can select the South Korean destroyer comp that we were working on, and I can simply take the layer styles and I can copy them to our destroyer asset, including the drop shadow effect, which I think we'll keep disabled just for the time being. We'll also copy over the effects as well. Bringing down the noise levels there. I'm also going to add one more effect as well. I'm going to go Effect, Fractal Noise, and I'm just going to set that to Soft Light. Perhaps even Multiply, and I just want to see if it's possible to create some variation over the ship just to help sell the effect a little bit. Yeah, that seems to work quite well. Let's see if we go down. All it's doing now is it's just simply adding some variations, which just helps. Anything that adds variations will help. So now we've got this destroyer and it's pre-rendered. Of course, it's not much faster because all of the effects and layer styles are still being applied to this, but at least now we have freedom just to move this around. And let's just take a quick look at how this looks. I'll just add a little bit of movement to it, just for the purposes of this. So it looks like it's moving through the ocean a bit more realistically now, especially with the waves. As for the front of the ship, feels like we should have a bit more connection with the ocean, if I'm honest. So I think I'll just fix that by creating a mask layer here. Add a little bit of feathering to that. This part just seems to be sticking out as slightly unnatural. I'm going to put the working resolution down to just half res. What I should actually do is render this out as an asset with all the effects. Of course, once we do that, we start to lose control over how we want it to look. Now, at this point, we could still turn a bunch of these effects off and change how it looks. I could still go in here and change some things like the bevel effect. And we can also change the depth on the bevel here. I wonder if we can make the size even smaller. Yeah, we can make the size very small, so it's just adding some very subtle effect. But I think it still helps. The inner glow option as well. This is essentially just trying to replicate an effect that happens near the edges of an object. When there's a bright light behind it, you get a little bit of spill. That's always adding as light spill. Bring the opacity down of this fractal noise down to 25% because it's a bit of a not very realistic. bring the opacity down of this. All of these effects work best when... See, I think the drop shadow helps, but only underneath the ship. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this asset. And I'm just going to hide part of it with a mask. I just want the drop shadow effect to be applied underneath the ship. That might not be possible. Well, it should be possible. Let's change that. Okay, there we go. Our drop shadow's only being applied underneath the ship, which is good. And the same thing with our bevel and emboss. I think that's okay. I wonder if like the inner glow. Actually, one thing we could do then, so we've got our drop shadow effect, which is working okay, but let's put that underneath. We are half res here, which is why it looks a little bit soft. Still a very sharp image. I think we could just pre-compose this. And then I'm just going to add a ramp effect. That's a shame. I thought I'd be able to change the blending mode on the ramp. It looks like I won't be able to, so I'll have to do it this way instead. Just change this to darken. Just try to add a little bit more variation on the light here. So since we've got the light coming from the right hand side, we can just do this. And then if we just make an adjustment layer, I think we can do the same thing we did last time. And create an adjustment layer, and we set the adjustment layer to use the alpha channel of this duplicated layer here. And so now this adjustment layer should only affect the front of the ship. Yeah, it's only affecting the front of the ship, so that way we can just brighten up the front of the ship a little bit. Might go back into our asset here. I'm just going to go to the color overlay and just increase that a little bit. Well, actually, rather than doing it there, we'll just do it on the main comp that we've got here. Actually, be a bit more simpler. Just go layer styles, color overlay. Maybe a quick curves adjustment, just to allow us to control the gamma. Trying to get the back of the ship to look like it's in shadow a bit more, just trying to define where the light is coming from. We can also do that with our ramp effect as well if we want. Yeah, there we go. We can make it look like the light is more only coming towards the front of the ship. I'm pretty pleased with that, I think. Okay, so now we could actually render this out as an asset, and then we could essentially just populate our scene with destroyers, which would be quite fun. Okay, so our asset has rendered. I've just imported this destroyer asset now, which is essentially just what we did before but pre-rendered as a MOV file. Again, I just rendered it as a PNG alpha, animated a little bit of movement on it, and then we've got our destroyer. And of course we can add a reflection in the water, set this to soft light, give it a Gaussian blur. If we're going to move it down, we need to press P and select both the keyframes for the position. And then just to make the shot look a bit nicer, we'll select everything, pre-compose it, and we'll do some basic color correction. I'm just going to duplicate the layer, set it to soft light. On that layer as well, I'll just tint on the soft layer, on the soft light layer. I'll also just make an adjustment layer. Create an elliptical mask just by double clicking on it, set it to subtract, put the feathering up, and we'll just create a bit of a vignette effect. Bring the opacity of that down just a little bit. And then go to composition settings, set that to 800. Just going to add a bit of cinematic crop to it. Pre-compose it again and just set the height back to 1080. I'll just give us a cinematic crop. And that's where I think we'll wrap up this tutorial. I think what we'll do is make this a two-part tutorial, because the first part has been looking at how to get to where we are now by creating a detailed matte, looking at ways to extract an image, and then doing the thing with the waves. We spent quite a lot of time playing around with different mattes and fractal noise effects to create the waves that you see there. I have to say, I think the waves are really the thing that's going to help this quite a bit. And of course there's a few issues with it. You could always go back and tweak values and stuff and try and get it a bit closer. But I think if typically if you had a shot and you just wanted to add a destroyer into the distance, I mean, this shot's kind of zoomed up on the destroyer, like the destroyer is the main focus of the shot. But if this was just a moving shot where there were supposed to be destroyers in the background, I mean, this would totally be believable. So I think in the next tutorial we'll just look at maybe adding some more assets in, maybe doing the trace arounds effect. We'll just, try and add a few bells and whistles to it. In the example you saw, there was a destroyer in the distance that was on fire and had smoke coming off of it. So those were just assets that are available for free on our YouTube channel. You can find them, but in the next tutorial I'll just include a link to them as well. Okay, so thanks for joining us on this tutorial. We're going to wrap things up there, but be sure to stay tuned for more content, more tutorials, and until next time, thanks for watching.